Hey guys, welcome to the Ramsey Paul Show. It is October 28th. This is going to be a little bit different show. As you probably could tell from the title, I'm going to give my thoughts about the Tucker Carlson interview of Nicholas Fuentes. Whoever thought this would happen? They were just a few weeks ago or months ago, like hated enemies. I think Tucker accused Nick of being a Fed and a homosexual. And then Nick fired back that Tucker's a secret CIA agent and an employee of the deep state. So they went back and forth, but Tucker had him on. And you can find the interview on X. Just look at Tucker Carlson's account. And it was a good interview. I usually don't listen to whole interviews, but I found it very interesting. Nick Fuentes has always been a very good speaker, and I love Tucker Carlson. So it was interesting to see them discuss issues in depth. And that's something you don't see much anymore with journalists, especially when you have someone controversial like Nick Fuentes. If a mainstream journalist has someone like Nick on, or even myself, they're not interested in giving you a fair hearing. Their point is to try to trap you, get you a gotcha question, and to try to make you look stupid. And they prefer to do it. It's not a live interview where they can edit it to make you look dumb, put scary music when you come in, and all that type of stuff. They all the dirty tricks that the mainstream media does. Whereas Tucker Carlson, he just actually had Nick on and they discussed a lot of issues. It was a good program. It really was. Nick is a very good speaker, as is Tucker. So I think it's well worth a listen. Now, first of all, a couple of things I want to back up. I'm making this video a little bit late because I just got back from the doctors, and yes, I finally got a good resolution. I haven't said this publicly, but this summer I had a blood test because of my physical. It shows some potential issues, and I went to a specialist and they did an MRI scan. There's a fear of cancer. And then just a week or so ago, I had a biopsy. But good news, I got the results of the biopsy late this afternoon. No cancer. I'm fine. I still have a underlying health issue, but it's something that can definitely be managed. So it's no big deal. I won't go into further detail, but thank you for understanding. So that's the good news. All right, getting back to this show and some of the notes I put down. I guess a lot of people, they're like, "Oh, Ramsey Paul, you were accusing Nicholas Fuentes of being a informer or a Fed," and I'm like, "Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things that haven't made sense, and I have a lot of criticisms of Nick. I've had him on my show before he was real popular on Happy Homelands, so it's not like I had anything against him. I back in the day thought he was very talented, very sharp young man, and then he got into the whole alt-right thing, which was fine. But then he had sort of a collision course with Richard Spencer, and I think Nick rightfully saw that the alt-right imploded because Richard Spencer, he kind of allied himself with some real kooks, the people that dressed up in costumes of the 1930s, and the whole thing blew up in Charlottesville, which I think Nicholas Fuentes was there. And then he decided, well, no, we're going to take a break from Richard Spencer. We're starting our own thing called America First, which he got the idea from Trump. Trump got the idea from Charles Lindbergh. But anyway, so Nick picked that up and decided, well, we're going to be a lot more optical. Plus, we're going to put an emphasis on Christianity, where I don't think Richard's a Christian by any means. So that was the difference, to try to shield the movement, if you want to call that, from immorality and just the craziness that happened with some of the strange figures in the alt-right. I remember the late great Z-Man, he wrote an article about it called The Weirdo Problem. Whenever you have a dissonant group, it's sadly going to attract some very strange individuals. It attracts also a lot of brilliant individuals, but I found that to be true. There's just some real oddballs out there, and sometimes they glob on to a movement for the wrong reasons, meaning they don't really care about the ideology so much. It's just something they see as being transgressive, and maybe they've done a lot of crazy stuff in their life, like dealing meth or something. So they want to align themselves with something they consider, scary, kind of like Satanism. But Satanism is now mainstream, so I'll do the alt right. So there was a part of that, and Nick said, "No, I wanted it to be very optical," and I supported that. And Nick actually had a big influence. It was interesting because they talked about Charlie Kirk, about, oh, Charlie Kirk hated Nick. I don't think that was the case at the end. They had early on a conflict because Charlie Kirk has some black homosexual on stage with him. He was doing his Turning Point USA thing, and one of the gripers asked, "How is celebrating sodomy? How's that a Christian value?" And Charlie Kirk didn't have an answer. And you could tell he was embarrassed about that. And over time, Charlie Kirk, his positions really changed from being a basic bitch GOP type, neocon almost. And he was starting to move a lot in our direction, as we saw near the end. In fact, Charlie Kirk was complaining to a lot of people that he was losing some big Jewish donors because while Charlie Kirk wasn't anti Israel, Charlie was starting to think, wait a minute, why do we need to put Israel first? That doesn't make a lot of sense. And it's a powerful lobby. So they started to go after Charlie. Then he was assassinated. It didn't have anything to do. I'm not saying that lobby had anything to do with his assassination, but that was the timing of it. So Charlie Kirk actually went through a pilgrimage. A lot of people go through. And in fact, Charlie Kirk, I didn't realize till he died, but I was one of the people he followed on Twitter. He followed me. So I'm sure he knew who I was, just like Nick knows who I am. And I think he was influenced a little bit, and Charlie Kirk made that progression. And that's a good thing. We got to understand people make these progressions. But Nick, then, so that was a lot of good things. But then Nick got into, I think, a lot of strange things, especially when it came to the Kanye West. And I get it because Nick is young and Conway was his hero, which seems straight, right? Which seems strange, right? You're a white advocate and your big hero, some black rapper that's not known for his morality. And but Nick was fawning all over Kanye. And then Kanye had that weird idea of running for president, and Nick was going to be his communication director, Milo, the campaign manager. I mean, a total disaster. I'm not going to rehash all that. But to me, I didn't know much about Kanye. That's not my generation. But oh, he's so brilliant. And I'm like, well, if he's really brilliant, he hides it well because I've heard the guy talk. He just seems insane. And the guy, I guess, is on meds. And then he was on Alex Jones wearing a gimp mask, praising Hitler. Yay. Just a lot of weird stuff that's not very optical, right? And but Nick stuck with that. And then that sort of really blew up. And I had problems with that. And but it looks like Nick is coming back from that. I don't think he's embracing that anymore. And then I never got an explanation with Nick on January 6th. Nick was one of the leaders of the Stop the Steal movement. He was well known. He was encouraging people to break into the Capitol. We have it on video. People that did a lot less than that were arrested. Even people that weren't at the Capitol, like the Proud Boys head, he wasn't even there and he got arrested. And Nick, by inciting people like he did, that's definitely a crime. But for whatever reason, even though he should have been one of the prime targets by the Biden administration, they pretty much just overlooked him, which is always seems very suspicious when that sort of happens. And I said before, in any dissident movement, when someone gets involved with the government and the police, it gets a little sketchy. The IRA, the Irish, when they fought the British, they had the same issue. If someone was arrested by the British, they wouldn't put that person in a position of authority anymore because there's too much risk they could end up flipping, being an informant. So I don't think that was adequately ever explained why he wasn't arrested when he was such a high profile target. So I think that is valid. And there's other criticisms I've had of Nick too. He doesn't seem to really care for women very much, which some of it I understand, but that leads to other questions. And so my opinions on all this haven't changed. And it sort of reminds me because in the interview, Nick quipped that he always admired Stalin. I think he was born on December 18th. And Nick said, "Oh, I always remember that day because of Stalin's birthday. And I admired Stalin." And of course, everyone out, they picked up on that clip. But if you hear what Nick said in detail, he admired parts of what Stalin did. He didn't admire Stalin like he was promoting him. He said that Stalin was evil. He really was. But you can admire someone because of the strength. In Stalin's case, taking Russia, that was a very poor country. And by the time Stalin died, it was a huge empire. It's one of the most powerful countries, the Soviet Union on earth. And that was due to Stalin, a very harsh man, a very tough man, a very murderer. There's no doubt about it. But you can still admire some of the great things he did. And that's in a conversation for adults. And most Americans are not adults where you can talk to them in that way. Most Americans see everything as cartoons, good guys, bad guys. That they don't understand that even if someone's evil, they can have certain traits that are good. That is true. And so that was where Nick was coming from. So I will use that example with Nick Fuentes. I think Nick does a lot of great things. There's a lot of things he's done in the past. I definitely cannot condone, especially when it came to the Kanye thing. And again, the whole January 6th thing still has a lot of questions in my mind about things. So that's just kind of a preface before I go into the interview and what came out about it. Oh, the other thing that looked bad too was when he was, remember, arrested that time because that Jewish lady came to his door and he maced her. Whatever happened to that case, by the way? I guess he got arrested and she was going to sue, but I haven't heard anything more about that. That's weird. But afterwards, there's body cam footage that the cop said, "Oh, aren't you that white supremacist?" And Nick says, "No, I'm not a white supremacist. I'm not even white. I'm a Mexican." So, denying your heritage, if you're supposed to be a pro-white advocate and denying that, I don't know. I get it. It was to the cops, but still not a great look. Not a great look. But the thing I want to say also is people change over time, and you got to take people where they are now, not from where they started. And there's a lot of people. I met Michelle Malkin in real life. Her husband, she used to watch my videos, and she invited me to her house. We had a great dinner, and she had that journey. She started out as kind of a neocon, and she ended up more on our side. A wonderful lady. I think she kind of got burned out, blackpilled by everything, but really smart, and I admire her. So she made the journey. Tucker Carlson did. I mean, they always bring up how he was a neocon, and Tucker would admit, "Yeah, I was. I regret it." And I saw the Iraq War, and he changed his positions. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene has done the same thing. I would argue Matt Walsh, JD Vance. JD Vance started out as more a neocon. Now I think he's one of the best people in the administration. I'd rather have JD Vance as president than Trump. I think JD Vance is smarter and a little bit more focused and cares more about ideology than Trump does. But JD Vance is an example of someone who's changed. So people can change over time. And I think we got to look into that. So if if Nick continues to go this path, I definitely can support him. All right. A couple of things they talked about. I'm not going to go through everything because part of the beginning was his background, how he got started, and how that one girl, Casey Dillon, I think her name was, she was kind of into him. I don't think Nick's into girls. Let's just put it that way. But she was always, even years ago, I remember watching them on Twitter. She was always kind of flirting with him, and he didn't really care about that. But she was with Ben Shapiro, whatever, and he talked about that story. That's how he was discovered. And I think they wanted to him be like a new young Ben Shapiro because they're very similar. They both talk really quick and they're really good high verbal IQ. But Nick started to go a different way, just have questions about Israel. And if you have questions about Israel in the official GOP, there's, that's the end. And he talked about how that girl then try to sabotage him. She would try to get him banned from everything. And that's a recurring theme that we see, that it's just not the left that tries to deplatform people. Probably our greatest enemies are people, conservatives. They will go to Media Matters, they'll go to all these places to try to ban people because they're like the gatekeepers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but that just shows how that all works. A couple of things I want to hit on that they talked about, and I think Nick handled real well, because when you're with someone that interviews you like Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson, it wasn't an adversarial interview like you would expect by the mainstream media with a dissident. But sometimes, Tucker would try to push on a few topics. And one was on identity politics. And Tucker was saying, how bad identity politics is. And Nick pushed back and said what I say all the time: it doesn't matter if you think it's bad. That's just human nature. We have identities. And the problem is, every other group is told to celebrate and their identity and work as a group. Like blacks, they have black organizations, clubs, Hispanics, Jews. You look at the neocons, like Ben Shapiro. It's all about identity politics. They're Jewish. They support Israel. That's their number one thing, and that's a good thing. But it's only evil, they said, for white people and Christians to have identity politics. No, 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 no. We can't do that. We got to be above that. We got to act in isolation. We can't form organizations of people that have our identity, because that's wicked and evil. And it's a little game I think they play to try to keep us weak, because they're scared of us organizing. If we're all just sort of on our own, they can manage it. But if we ever got together and worked as a group, that frightens them. So that's why they try to do the propaganda, especially on the mainstream right. They'll rail against identity politics. Ben Shapiro will be, even on the left, saying, "Oh, the identity politics by the transgenders and the BLM and all that, that's just wicked." But he never draws the comparison that Ben Shapiro is a big advocate of identity politics for his people, the Jewish people. He glosses over that. But if any white people start to bring up, hey, we're white and we should advocate that, just other people advocate for their group. We are a group. We have our own interest. Doesn't mean we're supremacists or we think we're better than everyone else, but we have our own identity. And oh, no, 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 you can't do that. And so Tucker took the more mainstream position that, oh, well, the neocons, yeah, they have identity politics too, like Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro and all the neocons, and that's bad. So we got to all get away from identity politics. And Nick was able to push back on that, which I thought was really good. And I was impressed with it, to say, no, no, you could say that, but we as humans are always based on our identity, like your male, your race, your ethnicity. That's just part of who you are, and you can't really change that. And if you don't advocate for your identity, you're just giving up the battle to other people that will. And so I think Nick made that point really well, and Tucker didn't really have a good response to that. And then they talked about the whole neocon thing, and I think this was trying to be a big thing about the Jewish involvement with the neocons. And I liked Tucker, but he was trying to do, well, not all the neocons are Jewish. And talked about Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and all these people, the Israel firsters. You could put Tom Cotton in that category. They're not Jewish. And that's true. But to try to claim that the neocon movement and the whole AIPAC and the supporting Israel has nothing to do with Jewishness is just crazy. It's just insane. Of course it does, right? But what Tucker was trying to do, and I think Tucker's going to learn it doesn't work, is saying, okay, I don't want to be called anti-Semite, so I'm against this identity politics for Israel, but this Zionism, it has nothing to do with Jews, it's everyone, right? And that's what I'm against. So that's what I stand for, but it's not against Jews, right? That's not what I'm against. of course, the Jewish people, at least a lot of them, they don't see it that way. They're like, no, you're against our ethno state, you're against us. And so obviously you see that now. Tucker's called, oh, the biggest anti-Semite now, even though Tucker is trying to say, no, 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 I love Jewish people. Some of them are my best friends. In fact, they even use that canard. But it doesn't matter, right? So I think a lot of the Jewish groups, if you don't support all their interest, it doesn't matter if you don't dislike them personally as a people, they will dislike you and call you an anti-Semite. That's just how it works. So you better do what they want, or they're going to call you an anti-Semite, which carries, at least it used to, it's weaponized where they can try to deplatform you, cancel you, do a lot of things against you. And so that's part of the intimidation of how to maintain power. And Tucker was trying to, split the hairs and say, well, no, 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 they're two different things. Whereas Fuentes was like, no, they're intertwined, right? You can't separate the Jewishness of Ben Shapiro or Sheldon Adelson or all these people from why they support Israel, right? It's just not random that Ben Shapiro and Sheldon Adelson support Israel and not Iceland or Hungary or Uganda or France, right? There's a reason they support Israel. It's just not coincidence that they're Jewish. That's the reason. And Nick says it's stupid to try to divorce the two, and he's right. And that made, I think, Tucker uncomfortable. And then Tucker, he really started this thing. And I really want to get past this canard, but Tucker did it. It's but not all Jews are that way. Yeah, this is a trope or canard, whatever the difference is, that you hear all the time, that it's really getting frustrated because, of course, you could say not all blacks, not all Muslims, not all whites, not all men. Of course. Of course. Why do we have to keep saying that? Of course, there's exceptions. If I make a statement, men are taller than women, that's a true statement, but not in every case. There's a lot of women that are taller than men. But in general, men are taller than women. That's a true statement. And so we shouldn't always have to clarify stuff like that. So, of course, there's exceptions. And I don't know anyone that's serious who disputes that. I mean, maybe you have some crazy people that think all Jews are bad, but I don't take those people seriously. I don't think there's that many of them, really. I think there's a lot of great Jewish people. My favorite guy in the Trump administration is Jewish, Stephen Miller. There's a lot of great people like that. So that is not the issue. But the issue is, do groups have certain behaviors that may not be good for your group? That's the key. So it's not like everyone in the group, but that's sort of irrelevant. We do this all the time with dogs, right? And I have a dog that's part pit bull. I didn't pick the dog Benji because he was pit bull. We found him. He was abandoned as a puppy. But they have certain traits, and you have to understand that. They're strong dogs. They have a strong bite. Benji has a strong bite, and he's a powerful dog. And you have to understand that. They're not golden retrievers. Golden retrievers have a different personality. As all dogs, they have their strengths and weaknesses. And that's the same with humans, right? Humans and different ethnicities and races, they have different qualities. That's why nations look so different, because people aren't interchangeable. That's just not with white people. As I've always said, if you took in Haiti and emptied Haiti of Haitians and put a bunch of Japanese in Haiti, it would soon look like Japan. And if you took all the Japanese out of Japan and put Haitians there, Japan would look very poor, and it would look like Haiti, because people make the difference. And so that's the key thing when you're doing this, is that it's not wrong to look at group dynamics and groups that can be hostile towards your interests. That's just, you're dumb if you don't see that. And there's a lot of groups that are hostile to our interest, and you need to recognize that. And the fact that, well, not everyone in the group, well, that's true, but that's an irrelevant thing to say. It's tiresome. And Tucker was trying to pull that out, that somehow Nick believed, all Jews are bad. And Nick doesn't believe that. I don't know many people that truly believe that, but that was one of the things that was talked about. And then they talked about, and I think this is important, the whole Christian Zionism heresy. I did a whole video about this, or live stream, I believe it was. Maybe it's a video. Check that out. I'm not going to go into it in depth right now. But Christian Zionism, it came about mostly in the early 20th century. It started in the late 19th century from Darby and the Schofield Bible. 1800 years of Christianity, there was no idea that there was a special covenant for Israel and Jews. That was never occurred to anyone. It's a heresy because the Christian position, traditional, is we have a new covenant in Christ, and all people, in order to get to the Father, must come through Jesus Christ. And the Jews aren't the God's chosen people anymore. As Peter said in the book, anyone that believes in Christ now is the chosen people. So I'm not going to go through all that, but that heresy has really infected a lot of America. And so you have nuts like Ted Cruz that base their foreign policy on some ancient biblical text that somehow they think relates to modern Israel. And it's just crazy. But I was good to see that Tucker said it was a heresy. It is. And that is a big problem. All right. And then they talked about some cultural items like porn and feminism. And I think Nick did actually better than Tucker. I think Tucker is part of it generational. He's older. Although I'm about Tucker's age, I'm a little older than Tucker, but I'm still aware of it. But as Tucker himself said, I think he was on Fox News. He's very rich. He was kind of isolated from a lot of the culture, whereas Nick is growing up in this culture. He sees what feminism has done and how a lot of modern women are. And a lot of the older people, like boomers, Tucker's not a boomer, but people like that, they don't really understand how things have changed. Like how so many women now go into prostitution via OnlyFans and it's considered acceptable. And the devastation porn has caused, including increasing transgenderism and all that, because it enables more and more extreme behavior. And that was an interesting discussion that I don't think Tucker ever really thought about before. And so that was really good. But the biggest takeaway that I really agree with Nick on, and Nick said he learned this from Trump, is that if we're going to win, yeah, the left's the enemy, no doubt. But the biggest enemy right now isn't really the left, it's the so-called right, mainstream conservatives. They are not our friends. They are just gatekeepers. They are gatekeepers to try to keep discontent focused in a way that's not going to change the system. That's their whole purpose. People like Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, Ben Shapiro, all those sorts. That is their purpose. They don't do fundamental changes. I mean, yeah, they'll throw us some bones, and Ben Shapiro will trigger some blue-haired lesbian on the college campus. I get it. They'll do that. But they won't do the fundamental changes. They'll be like, oh, we're against illegal immigration, but we're for legal immigration. Like, what difference does it make if our country's gone, right? We replaced our people. And to be fair, more and more people are seeing that, even in the conservative movement. So I think the mainstream, or as Michelle Malkin called them, the conservative Inc., their whole function is to gatekeep and to try not to make any fundamental changes. And so that's why they tend to war mostly with us. And they need to be destroyed. They need to be wiped out. Otherwise, there's not going to be a fundamental change. There's no way to fundamentally change the country if you're supporting people like Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, that may say things that sound nice to us, but fundamentally they're for the system that is destroying our people. They are part of the system that allowed our country to be overrun with immigrants. They are. They've been in there forever and they haven't done anything. Now it's popular to stop that. They try to act like, oh, yeah, we always believed in that. Don't believe in them. And we can't trust people that fundamentally put another country, in this case, Israel, before America. We just really can't. And as Nick said, a lot of these mainstream conservatives, they are fine with the cancel culture as long as it doesn't happen to us. In fact, they think this is good. This is a way to spare them so they can tell their leftist buddies or Democrats, hey, we're not bad like those people like Nick Fuentes or Tucker or even Matt Walsh now. Or no, we're not like that. In fact, we support you banning them and deplatforming them. Yeah, that's what we support. But we're the good ones. And part of it's a grift. They want to keep the money coming in. So they don't really care. They're not standing on any real values. They just want the paycheck to come in. And so that fundamentally needs to be our battle within the conservative movement and in the GOP. I guess one of the areas I would differ on Nick with that is we have to be understanding where people start, like Tucker. And yeah, he was a neocon, but I think Tucker's a really good guy now. We have to understand that. I would say the same with Matt Walsh. I would say the same with JD Vance. I know Nick hates JD Vance, but I think JD Vance is probably, besides Stephen Miller, a person closest to us than anyone in the administration, including Trump. So I think we have to understand that and not try to ostracize everyone that doesn't meet our purity standard, whereas Nick tends to do that. So I would disagree with Nick on that. Now, afterwards, and Tucker, he knew he's taking a real risk bringing Nick on. And the mainstream conservatives, they've gone crazy. They've called Tucker a bunch of names. They're going to do everything they can to try to isolate and shame Tucker and ostracize them. They're already doing this. Like, they don't want Megyn Kelly to work with Tucker anymore. They don't want Turning Point USA to have Tucker speak. It's a very feminine way of doing things, kind of a catty way women operate. They go behind your back and try to tell on you. That's how women operate. And it's a very feminist type of culture, the mainstream conservatism. And so they're relying on that. And hopefully people will stand firm and say, hey, it doesn't mean we agree with everyone. So it doesn't matter. I'm sure I disagree with some things with Tucker. I disagree some things with Nick, but you don't try to ostracize them. Whereas the mainstream conservatives, their whole point is to try to gatekeep. And they are really our biggest enemies because they're happy of us being destroyed as long as they protect the establishment from getting any meaningful pushback on it. And the conservatives, all they do is whatever the left adopts as a value 20 years ago, that's the mainstream conservative position now. Like gay marriage, right? Now the mainstream GOP conservative position is all cheerleading so-called gay marriage. And that was unthinkable 20 years ago. But that's how conservatives act. They don't really conserve anything. They're like David French. If you know him, he was National Review. He's like a gay race communist now. That's always the way they go. So they just go a little bit slower than the left. And their whole function is to provide kind of false opposition to the left. Yeah, they'll oppose some things. But mostly who they really hate with venom is people that fundamentally want to change things. And so what's really the battle I see in the conservatism, GOP, or whatever you want to call it, is what are we? What's our philosophy? Are we more of an Israel first people that reject Jesus Christ and his teachings? Meaning, no, Jews don't need Jesus Christ. We don't have, we don't need the Christian values. We have Judeo-Christian, which doesn't make sense because Christianity was a rejection of the Old Testament. It was a fulfillment of the Old Testament. After Christ, there's no more sacrifices. Jesus is our sacrifice. You can't go back to Judaism, as Paul said, going like a dog goes back to his vomit. You can't do that. But so you got to decide that, or you're going to put America first and embrace Christianity. That's really the decision there. And I know not everyone's Christian or religious, but even if you're not religious, those are really the two choices. Right now, the mainstream GOP party is the former. They're their ideology and theology is very Jewish, the way they look at things and how they operate, and Israel first. You look at Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, that's what they focus on. America's kind of a side thought. They only think of America in as much as it helps Israel. I think Ben Shapiro said that once. The reason he loves America is because it supports Israel. Or you could have, we're not against Israel, but we got to put America first, and we got to embrace the teachings of Christianity. It doesn't mean you have to be a Christian, but the founding fathers, they were deist or they were Christian. They weren't Judeo-Christian. They wouldn't understand what that meant. And so that's the fundamental way we have to decide. So it's sort of a civil war going in the Republican conservative party at this point. And the establishment, because they get a lot of money from AIPAC, a lot of money, and they want to be in good graces with the people that have control over the media and so forth. They don't want to upset that apple cart. So they're very much in, oh, we got to keep Israel first. That's what we're about. But the younger people, especially younger men, they're not really excited about that. That's not what they look at as the reason for this whole thing is just to advance Israel's interests. Doesn't mean they're opposed to Israel. Like myself personally, I'm not opposed to Israel. I think Israel's kind of a good model for an ethno-nationalist state. Ironically, they are. I think we should emulate them. But of course, they don't want that. They want ethno-nationalism. Jewish people get it, but we don't. It's evil if we get that. So that double standard, I think young people are saying, no, that doesn't make any sense. And if Israel can protect their borders and Ted Cruz or Todd Cotton or Lindsey Graham, they would scream bloody murder if a bunch of Africans were dumped in Israel. They just go crazy. So we don't need them dumped in our homelands either. And but so this is a defining thing right here. So it was a big interview because Tucker Carlson was huge, mainstream GOP conservative type. I mean, they're trying to ostracize him now, but good for Tucker. He could have just gone along with the status flow, but he took a chance and he brought Nick on, and good for Nick. I think he handled himself well in the interview, and it should be interesting to see the reaction going forward. So thanks, guys. A little bit longer video, but thank you, and talk to you guys later.